Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. This is regarding electric vehicle carbon offsets. The purpose is to help facilitate an understanding of a new methodology, a new way to improve the business case fundamentals for electric vehicle charging. We'll be discussing a voluntary carbon offset methodology that can help create a new revenue stream to assist site owners who host EV charging. Next slide, please. We're from Connecticut Green Bank. We'll be your host today. We've got Laura Fidel, our finance and carbon market specialist, and I am Matt Masunis. I'm with legal, regulatory, marketing, and outreach for Connecticut Green Bank. Our guest speaker today is Sue Hall. She's the founder and CEO of the Climate Neutral Business Network, which pioneers carbon strategies of Fortune 50 companies and led the development of this methodology among the partners on this initiative for the past 2 years. We'll start with a quick market overview. The most recent quarter is partial on this graph. Electric vehicles sold in the U.S., the number will probably hit 1 million in roughly 6 months' time. There's been continuous quarterly sales records since Q4 of 2015. 2017 sales, they were up 23% year over year. And we still have a wild card, of course, with the Tesla Model 3. So which comes first, the sales of electric vehicles or the installation of public charging to support them? Well, what we're seeing is that EV uptake and charging infrastructure do actually tend to grow together. Jeff Allen from Forth, who is not pictured here, said that electric vehicles and chargers are less like a chicken and egg problem because that denotes kind of a paradox and a stop-start mandate when it comes to one or the other. And more like a hot dog and hot dog bun problem, because those two products never seem to be sold in packages of the same number. So you've got this pernicious problem of superfluous buns or superfluous dogs, and so you need a package of the other in order to catch up with the first one. So the moral of that story is continual iterative growth in EV charging infrastructure is going to be needed in the years to come. Connecticut seems to be delivering on this. What you're seeing here is a state map of publicly available charging stations, irrespective of whether it's level 2 or fast charging. There's approximately 315, comprising 703 charging outlets, according to the Alternative Fuels Data Center. So we're doing a good job, in large part thanks to installations under our state Energy and Environmental Protection Agency's EV Connecticut grant program, which covered about half of those. But moving forward, Center for American Progress actually recently reported that for the U.S. to hit its Paris Agreement original targets, it would need to add 14 million new electric vehicles and more than 333,000 public charging outlets by the end of 2025. Currently, the U.S. has 18,245 stations and almost 50,000 charging outlets, which means the charging target is about 6.6 times the current amount and 14 times for electric vehicles. So some states are on track, and we think Connecticut among them, to build the infrastructure necessary for EV charging. Current funding at the state level and payments from Volkswagen made to the federal government following the emissions cheating scandal, that only covers about half of the fare, which is about $4.7 billion needed in electric vehicle infrastructure nationwide. So additional public resources and private investment are necessary to close that remaining $2.3 billion gap. And that's where ideas such as the one we're discussing today come into play regarding providing a new option for potentially moving that economic curve to incorporate more electric vehicle site hosts through their own economic incentives. Next slide, please. At this point, I'm going to hand it off to Sue Hall, who's the organizer of the EV Charging Carbon Coalition. Thanks so much, and Sue, welcome.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks to everyone who's joining us here today. Congratulations on the number of EV charging systems that you already have deployed and the EVs in Connecticut there. I'm Sue Hall. I'm CEO of the Climate Neutral Business Network, and had the honor to help form the EV Charging Carbon Coalition back in 2016. You'll see many partners here, Connecticut Green Bank amongst our founding partners, along with Electrify America, that's installing fast chargers across the nation. Exelon, our utility, EVgo, our network service provider, Siemens with the charging equipment, and the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance with many of the cities that are looking to accelerate the deployment of EV charging infrastructure. This has been a tremendous group, and we came together essentially recognizing, as Matt put it, both the hamburger, or rather hot dog and bun challenge, that essentially EV charging infrastructure was going to need to find access to additional sources of capital if it was going to be able to accelerate its deployment. Back in 2016, and still pretty much now, the business case for EV charging was not looking that compelling. And so we recognized that opening up access to the carbon capital markets potentially could really help accelerate investment and deployment. To do that, you need to develop a new methodology, a carbon methodology by which those credits can be certified. And that methodology that we've been developing as a coalition is now running through its approval process. More on that shortly. And essentially, the carbon credits that EV charging will then be able to issue essentially are anchored in the amount of kilowatts that you supply the vehicle, which the methodology then converts to estimate the amount of fuel that has been saved by switching out fossil fuel vehicles as the EVs drive along the road, and then kind of deducting out the greenhouse gas impacts for the kilowatt hours consumed themselves. So that's the team that's put this methodology together. And often, next slide, please, folks ask us, well, what's the process for this? How exactly do you open up the carbon capital markets? And this next slide shows you how that's done. It's an example from when Chevrolet opened up the carbon capital market for university campuses who could then earn carbon credits for their energy efficiency reductions. But EVCCC is following the same process here. So as I mentioned before, if you're going to issue carbon credits for a new domain, for campuses' energy efficiency aims, or in this case for EV charging, you need to be able to have those reductions measured and certified by an independent carbon credit certifier, in this case, the Verified Carbon Standard. And they can't do that unless they have the rules of the road, the methodologies by which they can then evaluate those projects and make sure that they pass all of the tests for integrity and quantity that are needed in order to make sure that they're credible. So the first step is to develop a new methodology, like the EV charging methodology that EVCCC is developing here. The projects, which would, in Chevy's case, were the campuses like Ball State, in your instance, it would be yourselves as folks installing EV chargers. The projects then need to come forward and get their greenhouse gas reductions certified by the Verified Carbon Standard against that new methodology. And once that process is completed, the credits from those projects are then issued into the VCS registry. And that provides, it's a bit like having a kind of a, an escrow bank account, if you like. It's a clearinghouse mechanism to make sure that we know exactly how many credits have been issued, who's purchased them, where they reside, and everything is clear and transparent. When purchasers come forward, like Chevy did, to purchase the campus's credit, they then go to the registry and take ownership of those credits, having paid the project owners for those credits. Chevy, in their case, is essentially retired those credits on behalf of the planet. And so you can see the basic kind of key steps here that are involved in opening up the carbon capital markets and thus enabling folks like yourselves as EV charging installers to earn credits following this process. Next slide, please. Alongside Chevy, you'll see that there are a number of other carbon credit purchasers, and they span all sorts of different sectors now. Other companies, like Interface, the flooring group, that was one of the very first carbon credit purchasers when they went carbon neutral back in 2000. But you've got Microsoft, Siemens with their carbon neutral commitments, many companies now, utilities, Seattle City Light, cities with the CNCA, other regions. So, the purchasing for carbon credits now on the voluntary market, and these are voluntary market purchases, those purchases really, in tonnage terms, are pretty much equivalent now to the compliance markets for credits that you find with your own RGGI on the electricity side of things, and in California. So there's a robust purchasing network out there, and as we'll see as we move to the next slide, that enables projects to come forward with the confidence that those credits will be purchased. The campuses did, and you yourselves can do so on the EV charging side of things now. But obviously the first question that any project developer like yourself is going to ask is, what's the business case? Because without knowing what kind of return on capital contribution the carbon revenues are going to make towards your project, you don't know whether or not this is a sensible road to take. And obviously one would not develop a carbon methodology unless the carbon business case were compelling. The campuses certainly found that the carbon revenues would contribute between about 5 and 25% of the incremental capital that they needed, for example, with Ball State, to put geothermal systems in the ground, and rather than up natural gas boilers that would have otherwise been their upgrade for the old coal boilers that they were looking to replace. But what's interesting when we look at this carbon business case for EV charging, if we move to the next slide, you'll see that the carbon business case for EV charging systems is really even stronger. What we're looking at here is the return not on incremental capital, but on actual capital, the return on the investment that you make when you put the chargers in the ground. And this was the first step we took in the development process, working with EVgo and many of the other kind of partners within the coalition. And we looked at this across a series of scenarios. We looked at the return on capital if you put just one charger in the ground, which is the top chart. The bottom chart is if you put a cluster of them, 4 chargers, say, in the ground. We looked at this across a number of different kind of levels of charging events that were delivered per day, because as you know, when you first put a charger in, you tend to get more modest utilization rates, but those rise over time. And we looked at them particularly across different values for the carbon credits that would be sold. And for EV charging credits, those are pretty much boutique projects. So one would be wanting to look here in this middle column at pretty much at a $5 to $10 range of pricing. $3 is more at the end of the kind of more common kind of commodity level pricing. And so what you'll see here is that, 5 to 10% return on capital is pretty much the kind of returns that one might look to see from the business case analysis that we conducted. In California, where you've got LCFS markets where the pricing is quite a bit higher, from $25 to $100 or so a ton, those returns are even stronger. But what's interesting with this voluntary market, I think, is that we would expect to see the utilization rates gradually rise over time as the kinds of Paris goals, the kind of ambitious goals that states and regions have set for themselves to get more EVs on the road, the utilization rates, the number of charging events are likely to rise. And so, over the medium term here, we expect these return on capitals to raise, even from the voluntary market. The 5 to 10% return is a really salient contribution, particularly when the business case for charging systems at the moment is not terribly robust as it stands right now. As several of our stakeholders put it, this is the kind of return on capital we need to access. Next slide, please. If you are looking to install high-powered systems, these are the DC fast chargers that are not just at the 50 kilowatt kind of power ratings, but at 150 or 320, what you see incrementally is that those returns tend to be that much better. So, more like perhaps, 4 to 8 or 5 to 11% returns on capital. So as the market matures for DC fast chargers and the larger systems come into place, again, that's another factor that is tending to encourage the return on capital from carbon. Next slide, please. But the question that you're probably asking yourselves is what would this mean for me if I'm a utility, or if I am a landlord, for example, at a multi-family housing unit? If I'm putting these charging systems in, and I might want to partner with the Connecticut Green Bank to bring a project forward, because they can put projects forward that would group all of your charging systems into one project, and then have those monies returned back to you guys. So, what would this potentially mean for me? Let's look at the utility case there in the first line. What we figured out is for a level 2 charger, kind of charger that one installs in residential homes, the 10-year contribution, because credits are issued first for a kind of over a first crediting period of 10 years. That 10-year contribution would represent more than, say, the $500 rebate that one of the Northwestern utilities was providing to its residential customers in order to encourage them to put level 2 charging systems into their homes. The carbon credit revenues were about 120 odd percent, so probably about $600 worth of value. So, the salience of those revenues, those carbon revenues, for many of the stakeholders like yourselves, who would be wanting to become a part of the solution and accelerate your own investments, the carbon revenues are salient. Let's look at another example here. This example was taken from a mall setting, imagining that we were Starbucks, where they don't own the parking lot. The landlord for the mall owns the parking lot, so actually Starbucks can't, it's not up to them to install the charger. It's actually up to the landlord who owns the parking mall. Well, approximately the value of a parking slot there in the mall in many parts of the US is around about $2,500. And again, the carbon revenues from a DC fast charger, if you put one in that mall, is comparable, about 100% of that parking lot value, $2,500. So by corollary, if you're looking at your multifamily dwelling, you're going to know what the value is of having an assigned parking space as you put, your charger into that development. And you can figure out then, if this looks like, if the carbon values are going to help you cover the kind of the value associated with that real estate investment if you designate it in that kind of way. So, we looked at this from the perspective of university campuses as well, and the kinds of fees that they had to pay to their service providers to rent the equipment, and again for that was considered salient as a contribution against their rental fees. A lot of the stakeholders that we spoke to as we built this business case, before we built the methodology, said, yes, these carbon revenues are salient and valuable to us. And so moving from the business case, if we look at the next slide, you'll see that the EV Charging Carbon Coalition then undertook a series of steps in the development process. We completed our business case back in 2016, and we then developed a white paper, a concept paper, where we went round to all of the stakeholders like yourselves and said, okay, if we develop an EV charging methodology, tell us the questions you've got in your mind. When we look at all the key methodology elements that we know we have to complete, how do we make sure we build a methodology which is one that will actually be practical and will meet all of the different considerations for integrity, credibility, practicability, implementability that you guys, will have in mind? And so, having spoken with many stakeholders across the country, we then began to develop the methodology itself with the verified carbon standard. And in parallel, the EVCCC partners began developing their own projects. Why do you develop projects in parallel with a methodology? Because you want to make sure that the hand fits the glove and the glove fits the hand. You've got to do these two things in parallel if you're going to have a good methodology that projects are going to be able to use successfully. And the team here with the coalition, the Green Bank, Siemens, Electrify America, EVgo, the cities were phenomenal in terms of the detailed feedback that they were able to provide us. The good news is that the methodology is about to be published and approved by the Verified Carbon Standard. So kind of watch the space in September. You'll probably see some media announcements happening right after the Verified Carbon Standard has given us their formal approval. We're in the last steps now with them. And then the pilot projects will be able to come and get their credits issued, their projects validated under the VCS system. And so as we move into the latter part of 18 and 19, the first projects will come through and get their credits issued. So by the time we get to 2019, there should be EV charging credits available in the marketplace. And so this really opens up a new gateway, and this is the opportunity that Connecticut Green Bank is bringing in really in a unique way to you guys in Connecticut. They're stepping forward and saying, We recognize there are so many of you as partners here in our state that are putting the chargers in place. It really wouldn't make economic sense for you to do this by the onesies and twosies and to bring in your charging systems individually. So they're looking to be able to invite you to bring your charging systems into a group project, which they would then be able to bring forward for validation and verification on your behalf. This is a phenomenal offer. There isn't anything quite like this in any other state right now. It speaks phenomenally to the Green Bank's pioneering leadership, which I know you've benefited from, many, many times before. This is just another example. So many thanks to them. More on that opportunity later, but let's just go back to some of the fundamentals in this next slide of the methodology, because I'm sure you'll have some technical questions around this, and I wanted to just highlight a couple of kind of core foundations for the methodology so that we could preview some of this with you. So a carbon methodology and is really the key that enables you to be able to capitalize your credits, and for that to be credible, you have to be able to demonstrate that your credits are additional. Okay, that's a wonky term. What does it mean? It basically means that your reductions go above and beyond business as usual. This isn't something that you were going to be doing anyway. And there are several tests that carbon methodologies can employ in order to make sure that you're on the cutting edge, that this is something which is helping a new and emerging market to gain a foothold and to essentially access the kind of revenues that will help, fundamentally, it overcome market barriers and help the business case to mainstream, because as we all know, it's kind of tricky at the moment for charging. So there are a couple of tests here which this methodology, the EV charging methodology employs. It certainly has a project test, which enables you project by project to look at the market barriers that are present in your region and to therefore claim that your reductions will be beyond business as usual because the market barriers you face are a demonstration that you're an emerging market at this stage. But there are other tests that methodologies can include, and we have included the second one here, this emerging market test. And what's helpful here is it's much, much simpler to apply. That test says, if you can demonstrate that your technologies, and in this case, we're looking at the penetration of EV vehicles. If EV vehicles represent less than a 5% market penetration of all of the light-duty vehicles on the road here in this case, then the Verified Carbon Standard says that's a good test, that's a credible test to make sure that this market is still at an emerging stage. And in our methodology, we've included the second test as well. There is a positive list. The state of Connecticut is listed, and so automatically, you would pass the additionality test because your EVs are below 5%. That positive list in the methodology is updated every 5 years. And so if you were to bring your projects in later in 5 or 10 years time, don't recommend it. You want to do it soon. But, you would then be able to confirm that that the state is still under 5% or not. And if it's no longer under 5%, then there is the capability within the methodology potentially to begin to look at this on a CBSA, a kind of an economic region basis. Okay, so the performance test may be included later on in the methodology. If you've got questions about that, I'm happy to take them in the Q&A. So the first two tests, the ones are included there. Another common question that folks ask relates to double counting. And there are many different ways in which the methodology precludes double counting and addresses that question. I'm going to highlight just a couple here in our next slide. First of all, double counting between compliance markets and voluntary markets. With RGGI with your cap and trade system, you don't have the transportation sector. You can hear my wonderful golden retriever just telling us that the ramparts have been breached here. Okay, so you don't have transportation systems within your cap and trade system yet. So there's no double counting in that context. I'll speak more about that in just a moment. There are questions that often come up relative to renewables. And so, for example, if you are installing dedicated renewables with your charging system, either on site or with a dedicated system, then you would need to be able to demonstrate that you haven't simultaneously sold renewable energy credits from those systems in order to be able to claim the kilowatt hours as renewables. The methodology itself for the regular kilowatt hours that you're bringing in essentially uses E-grid emission factors. And so those come, as it were, ahead of the kind of commitments that you might be making towards RPS or any retired RECs, etc. Similarly, you know, if you know that the kilowatt sources that you are drawing on from your site hosts have already issued RECs, then you can't claim those as renewable kilowatt hours. There are a number of other DAPL counting mechanisms in the methodology. Happy to look at those, during Q&A. So I'll lastly just touch on this overlap between the compliance and the voluntary market, because it may well be the case that at some point in time, Reggie might want to think about including transportation systems. And I'd just like to highlight an innovation that Washington State incorporated into its cap and trade system, because that innovation enabled them to be able to issue in-state credits in covered sectors without double counting. So in this case, if you were to do the same thing as Washington State and they set up a set-aside reserve under their cap, if you were then to issue EV charging credits, as transport then would be a covered sector, you would be able to issue those credits and draw down an equivalent number of units from your set-aside reserve. And that way you would avoid double counting with the cap and trade structure, so that credits could be issued under the cap to the fossil fuel importers, which is where they are automatically given under a cap and trade system. So the fossil fuel importers would still get their credits under the cap. But since you're putting the capital in to invest in your charging system, you would still gain, in this case, compliance credits under a RGGI cap and trade system, provided it put this set-aside reserve in so that those credits would not then be double counted. This is important because it would enable the business case for investing in EV chargers to still have a carbon credit revenue incentive for you guys to put chargers in place. Because let's face it, the fossil fuel importers don't put the charging systems in, you do. Okay, so that's just a last footnote on kind of how to avoid double counting in the context of both voluntary and compliance carbon markets. And with that, I'm sure there will be a lot of questions, which I'll gladly answer in Q&A, but I just want to appreciate the fact that you've all kind of come together today in order to learn more about how potentially you could bring your own chargers in for certification and gain access to that 5 to 10% return on capital set of revenues, which we all recognize would not only be salient, but would really help you deploy those systems. So with that, I'll pass it back to Matt and Laura, who will help you understand a little bit about what it would take for you to move forward with them in partnership to do this.
Thanks, Sue. Before I jump into that, I did just want to mention, and I know Sue referenced this, that we wanted to make this a bit interactive at the end. So if at any point anyone has any questions or comes up with any questions, feel free to ask using the questions function within this webinar. And what we'll do at the end is read through the questions, and amongst the three of us will either provide an answer or get back to you after we do any further research to come up with an answer for you. So with that said, for the final bit of this webinar, I just wanted to explain how we thought the Green Bank, or how the Green Bank was thinking about approaching the usage of this new methodology and what sort of opportunity this opened up in Connecticut. I know Sue touched upon this, but we thought it's important to get into a bit more detail and also get some feedback from everyone as well as this evolves. But what we're proposing as the Green Bank is to act as an aggregator for credits coming from charging stations within the state of Connecticut. So we know that this methodology, once it becomes finally approved and available for use, will be available for everyone to use. But there's, to some extent, a high barrier to entry or a cost of entry associated with the usage of the methodology. So that includes basically, applying to VCS for these credits under the methodology, and the validation of the response and the verification of the credits, along with some reporting requirements over the lifetime of the credit issuance from VCS. In addition, of course, is the monetization of the credit. So once you want, if your charger is to receive credit, the value really comes from selling the credits into the market and finding an interested party in those credits. So that's something that the Green Bank feels that we're uniquely positioned to help with and to take advantage of using this methodology within Connecticut. Our thought is that we would work with EV charger owners in the state to aggregate their credits. We would need to obtain access or environmental or assignment of rights to the chargers in order to submit them for crediting under VCS. We would obtain the third-party verification and approval of the charging of the data associated with each of these charging events. And to do that, we will be creating, it'd be like a contract or an agreement in place that includes the assignment of the environmental rights and any sort of revenue split associated with the revenue generation, the revenue generation from selling these credits into the market. So mainly, covering our costs associated with the validation and verification of these credits. We're looking, with all that in mind, we're looking for partners within the state. So particularly EV charger owners who would be interested in monetizing their EV chargers in this way. We can work with any charger owner in the state of Connecticut. As you know, given that we are the Connecticut Green Bank, currently we're restricted from operating outside of the state. But we would, any sort of municipality, business, any institution or owner of a charger would be eligible for this program. And again, we're looking to sort of, the program's in process, it's being designed. We're looking to have some exploratory conversations with potential partners. No, we're not looking for any commitment, but we're happy to chat through ideas, any concerns, questions over the next few weeks or months as we develop this. Again, the methodology, it's not yet publicly available, but it should be in the coming months. So it would be great to start these conversations as soon as possible.
And hi, this is Matt. We are also seeing that it's not only industry folks on this webinar. There are others out there who engage communities on a regular basis. If you've got ideas about this, or if you know site hosts and want to put them in touch with us, or help relay any sort of information that might be useful in this regard, we would absolutely welcome that too. Anything else for now? I think we'll be moving on to questions.
Yeah. But I will read out the question, and Sue, Matt, or myself will provide an answer if possible. And again, otherwise we'll get back to you if we need to do a bit more research. So with that in mind, the first question, Sue, this will probably be for you. It's specific to the slide on the higher crediting for higher voltage DC fast charger stations. And the question is, how does the credit increase for higher wattage DC fast charge systems when the costs go up, but the number of assumed charges per day remains constant?
Yes. The basic drivers there in that business case, you certainly got more capital there. The charging we took to remain the same, but recognize that one of the great benefits of the high-powered DC fast charge systems is they put more kilowatt hours into those large batteries within a given charging event. So the kilowatt hours delivered and thus the carbon correspondingly reduced through all those much larger number of miles driven also increases. And so what you're seeing essentially there, the ROC goes up because the relationship between the kilowatts delivered and the carbon capital that actually it takes to put that system in place has shifted slightly. In other words, you're getting a slightly more efficient, in terms of investment kind of economics, you're getting a more efficient delivery of kilowatts for the given investment in the charger system. So that's why the ROC goes up. It's because you're delivering kilowatt hours more efficiently, both in terms of time, but also importantly per dollar capital investment for any given charging event. Happy to chat with whoever asked that offline if you'd like to go into that further, but that's the basic drivers.
Thanks, Sue. The next question is, can a municipality that received a DEEP grant for the cost of the charger use this program? And I think the response to that is yes, because this is sort of a completely separate initiative under a separate purview of VCS.
And there is a look back for existing installed chargers, right?
That's correct as well.
Yes, so let's work that just a little. So, the part of the additionality test, alongside evaluating whether you're still on the positive list and your EVs are still under 5% market share, there is something called a regulatory surplus test that also comes in under the additionality assessment. And that asks whether there is a law or a mandate or a regulation requiring you to do what you're doing here. The kinds of grants and assistance that can be received from municipalities or agencies, et cetera, is not considered a law or regulation, and so it doesn't impact the additionality of your charging system in terms of the credits that you'd issued. And as Matt was just mentioning, there is a grandfathering period as well. So if you received a grant in the past and you want to be able to issue credit for chargers that you installed several years back, let's just kind of cover this as well now. Provided that you put your project forward with the Connecticut Green Bank within 2 years of the publication of methodology. So you've got a 2-year grace window from, say, end of August 2018. Provided you come within that window, you can get credit for any systems that were installed in the ground for the 4 years prior to the date in which your project got validated. So what that means is that all of those systems that you've already got in the ground that let's say you get your project together and you put it in 2019. Okay, take off 4 years, 2015. You would then be able to earn credits for chargers installed in the ground from 2015 onwards. And you would earn credits for 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, and then going forward. So you can actually earn credits for those prior years as well. You are allowed to grandfather. So there's maybe a couple of aspects to that question, and I think we've touched on both of them.
Thanks, Sue. And then a follow-up to that was if the follow-up to the question about the same asker is if this includes individual-owned level 2 chargers in a homeowner's garage, for example. And I would say yes, there shouldn't be any issue with that, of course. Those would equally be...
So let's look at this kind of from the perspective of it's typically a utility that is looking at the chargers installed in a homeowner's garage. And just like any other kind of, level 2, it will pass the additionality test because your EVs are still under 5%. A utility is in a good position to aggregate those credits. And as Laura was mentioning before, you do need to make sure as you bring projects forward that you have got the some of the underlying I's dotted and T's crossed in terms of making sure that you've got ownership and authorization. So in a utility context there, you would be wanting to get kind of confirmations from those residential installers that you've got permission to capitalize their credits for them. One way that utilities have thought to do this, many of them provide the $500 type rebates for residential programs to help folks install the systems in their home. And many utilities have been thinking about putting into the kind of fine print, as it were, you've got this rebate, here are the terms and conditions, the kind of the permission given for you to be able to, as an aggregator, capitalize the credits on behalf of your residential homeowners. So there's a little more color and background on the level 2s for homeowners.
Thanks, Sue. All right, so here's another question, Sue, probably for you as well. As an EV driver, why would I want to freely give away a commodity, the offset, to a charging station company? Would I get a discount on the electricity I'm drawing from that station as a trade-off?
This is one of the questions we looked at right at the beginning, the relationship between the driver and the EV charging station. So obviously, as a driver, if you are installing a system in your own home and you own the car, you have no obligation whatsoever to kind of participate in this program. If you are driving, around in a public setting, and you choose to use a charger that someone else has installed, where there will be clear kind of notices, decals, etc., on the charger that will notify you that the carbon credits in this context here are being claimed by the charging system. This was part of the revenues that were needed in order, to get this charger installed and accelerate the market for charging systems. Then the ownership is clearly kind of then retained by the charging system, and it's your choice as to whether to use it. So the ownership in that context is kind of clarified under the rules within the methodology, and the EV charging systems that are claiming credits need to be able to communicate that in one way or another, through decals or through the kind of contracts that they've got for services with you as a customer, in order to make that clear. What's interesting, I think, from a business case perspective, and I think there is a joint interest here that is shared. It's extremely well documented that one of the major barriers inhibiting folks from driving electric vehicles and purchasing them is a lack of confidence in the EV charging infrastructure. And without that charging infrastructure in place, we're really limited to much, to lower mileage ranges. And so the return on capital from the carbon for the charging systems themselves, as we saw, is really very salient. It's about 5 to 10%. If you were to compare carbon revenues accruing to an EV owner, they would dwarf the significance of the kinds of rebates that are already incentives that are available, for example, from the federal government. So relative to the purchasing price of an EV, carbon credits wouldn't move the needle. They wouldn't change what you do. So you buy an EV because you want to, and because the much larger incentives that are available are ones that make sense to you. The carbon value, if you were to retain that value for yourself relative to the car, would be trivial. It would be a drop in the ocean. So, since your ability to use that car in the public domain, is dependent upon the charging system and infrastructure coming into place, and the ownership is declared, and the underlying kind of contracts and systems put in place, to those ends, the shared interest that you have really makes the charging systems, a compelling and a logical place to choose by charging at that site that's told you that the credits are going to them, to allocate the carbon credit value to them. Without that, you wouldn't have the privilege of someone else making their investment in public sector charging systems that you then have the privilege to use. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. There was another question that came in, and it was, can you explain summarize, I guess, all at once, who is eligible to opt into this program?
Right.
So I think we answered it in pieces, but it's probably good to summarize it.
Yes, let's just summarize it. So, if you are an entity which owns and operates an EV charging system that you have installed in the ground in the United States, or indeed in many other countries around the globe, about 20 of which are already automatically included in this methodology as eligible, then as an owner-operator, you will be eligible. There is no constraint like sector X is precluded. So no matter where you are, whichever sector you're in, it applies to light-duty vehicles. It applies to heavy-duty vehicle charging as well. So if you're an owner-operator, if you if you don't own the charging system, but you are a service provider, let's take an example here like ChargePoint. They don't own the systems, but they do provide all of the support services. Then they can also bring a project forward on behalf of their clients, provided that they have authorization from their clients, because their clients own the chargers, to bring and capitalize the credits on their behalf. So if you don't own the systems, you can serve in an aggregator role, and that's something that that a ChargePoint would need to do because it doesn't own the systems, and it's a service which the Connecticut Green Bank is offering to you guys as well to do on your behalf here. So if you own a system, you can step forward. If you don't own the system, you can reach an agreement with the partner that you are in relationship with. So let's say that, for example, you might be a developer, and you might have lots and lots of multifamily unit developments, but you don't actually end up owning the charger, but you put them in developments all over Connecticut, where you can collect the permissions from all your clients to capitalize the credits on their behalf, and you can pass that permission on to the Connecticut Green Bank so that you can join their project and have them capitalize the credits on your behalf, get the proceeds, and pass it back down the line. Okay, but fundamentally, there is no constraint in terms of which sector you're coming from in the US, both LDV, HDV, and if you don't own the charger, you're essentially working in an aggregator role. So you are then helping to collect and pass on and group the credits on behalf of those that do. And
worth reiterating as well, it's applicable to chargers that have been installed, will have been installed within 2 years of the date the methodology becomes applicable. And Sue, are there any restrictions on the type of chargers that would be eligible?
Thanks, good question. So level 2s, DC fast chargers, both at the 50 kilowatt and the higher power chargers too, are all eligible. Level 1s, there are some very simple level 1s as well that sometimes are still put in, and those are included within the mix as well. But typically what you're going to see are the level 2s and higher power chargers.
Thanks, Sue. So that seems to be all the questions we've received at the moment. What I would say is I'll keep, we'll give you guys another minute or two in case anything else pops up. What I would say is that if any additional questions come up at any point while you're sort of thinking this over, or if you would like to, if you're an EV charger owner or have rights to an EV charger and want to discuss this with us in more detail, feel free to reach out to Matt or myself. We have our contact details up on the slide. What we'll do as well as is distribute the slides or make available the slides to everyone who did register in case you'd like to review further on your own.
Super.
Yeah, it doesn't,
and if
doesn't look like it's very much question. Sorry, go ahead, Sue.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that, you know, if folks on the line here are interested and have got further questions about how they might, practically speaking, put projects together, they've got projects that they're interested in developing, I would gladly join Matt and Laura on a follow-up conference call so that those of you that are thinking about putting projects together might, you know, want to get some of your kind of questions, your follow-up questions, you know, answered. So we'd be glad to, you know, have a follow-up call with those of you that would like to explore this further. And I think you've got a fabulous partner with the Green Bank here. Thanks to them for pioneering, you know, in this way.
Thank you, Sue, for coordinating that network. Do we have any other questions at the moment, Laura?
No, I think that's all.
Well, thanks everybody for joining today. We appreciate your attention, and as Laura said, we'll make slides available to anyone that registered, and we'll put the effort. I believe we'll be able to circulate a recording of this webinar as well. So thanks so much. I hope everyone has a great day. Take care.